Hi everyone, welcome to the latest and greatest episode of Failing Up. Today I'm sitting down with Phil Rosen, the editor-in-chief and co-founder of Opening Bell Daily, a financial newsletter, and in my opinion, one of the best financial newsletters. In this episode, we talk about the impact that phones have had on the younger generation, especially Gen Z, as well as making the jump into starting your own business and what it takes to succeed in that business, especially in journalism, as well as the difference in reporting between the Biden administration and the Trump administration. Phil is an absolute treat to have. He's brilliant and he's an incredible writer. So I hope you learn as much from this episode as I have. Phil, how are you?
I'm doing very well, Claire. Thank you for having me.
I'm very excited to have you here. I just want to jump into politics. No, I'm kidding. We are going to start with your career and as well as your writing craft. What is something that you thought you initially had right about success that you in fact had wrong?
I didn't realize until much later that success is pretty much, I think, just persistence. Like if you show up longer than everyone else doing the same thing as you will do very well, I think. And, that sounds so obvious now to say that. But before, I used to think, okay, if I want to start a blog online, I need the best website, I need the best graphics, I need the coolest landing page and URL, but none of that really matters because it's just about putting the reps in. And I learned that very early on in my writing journey, let's say, because that blog ended up getting me my first job at a newspaper, and the blog was very unimpressive and the website was not attractive. The URL was not great. So I had all the branding things wrong, but because I was writing consistently and publishing at a very high volume, that's how I got my first job.
Okay. And how do you continue to improve your writing, especially in the age of AI where there's so much being just completely auto-written all the time? I feel like there's so much content that's now being seen that is either at least partially written by AI or at least fully written by AI. Do you use AI in your writing?
There's a lot of questions in that. I'll try to take them one by one. The way I improve as a writer is trying to write every day. So this goes back to the reps. There's nothing better you can do for yourself if you're trying to write well than writing a very high volume. So I've probably written something every day for almost 10 years now, with very few, probably 98% of the days in the last 10 years I've been writing. And that is what I attribute being able to write from. It's not I didn't have a formal writing background as far as, taking classes and things like that. Everything just came from writing a lot over many years. And as far as your AI question, I think AI can be an incredible tool and I do use it. However, I do think, especially college students and early career folks that are going to lean on it without having the base of being, let's say the base of having the writing skills.
Yeah.
Leaning on the AI before you have the baseline level of competence, I think can be very dangerous as far as, you're limiting your own growth. So right now, sometimes I use AI as an editor, like a sort of like a Grammarly or a spell check tool. That's pretty good because I don't use an editor like a real human editor right now. When I write my newsletter, but I do think what we're going to see increasingly is a very aggressive proliferation of newsletters and written content online and blogs and all these different. You'll even see like SEO specific websites come up just to capture search traffic, and all these will be AI generated. So the internet is about to get much more crowded, and a lot of the AI writing is actually pretty good.
I know. I feel like it's gotten better. I can still source it out because of all those dashes in the middle.
Yeah. And I was using those way before AI came around. But the ones who can separate themselves from all the noise, I think, will be the ones who, let's say, if they had to, could write with pen and paper. Mm-hmm. And I think that's...
But how do you separate from the noise?
As a writer?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think you show up longer than everyone else, for one. So if you play the long game, you'll separate yourself because, I knew plenty of people in sort of the early blogging world in like 2018 that were blogging and starting blogs around the same time as me. And I don't think any of them are still doing it. So that's one way to separate, but as far as separating from the noise of the internet and the AI, this boom of content, it's going to be increasingly difficult. And, if you want to look at like branding as a moat and like distribution as a moat, that's one way to think about it. But I do think, the internet in many ways is a free market of ideas. So if you can write the best things and the best ideas on a place where people are already reading, like a LinkedIn or an X, then in theory, you should be able to cut through the noise.
Amazing. Good advice. What are the biggest lessons you've learned about journalism? What are the biggest lessons you've learned from when you worked in journalism that those out of journalism can apply to themselves? So whether it be writing or any sort of lessons that you learned throughout that process.
So as a independent journalist now, I will say if I had tried to be an independent journalist right after college, I would not have made it. So I had to go through a newsroom job. So I worked in Business Insider and I did that for almost 3 years. And that's where I learned sort of the ropes of being a reporter, doing interviews, even writing at a very like high speed environment. So at the time, I remember when I was first starting, I had to write some days 3 to 4 to 5 stories a day, and we would publish them right away online. And I'd never done anything like that before. And it was super intense right at the start. But because I went through that, now, if I write 1 story a day, it feels like I'm not doing any work. And that's because the volume up front and sort of the intensity of the newsroom trained me in a way so that, okay, my tolerance and my work capacity is very high now. So going back to, the lessons of that, I think working in an institution or like a corporate environment, it's very easy to look down on that these days, especially, if you're friends with entrepreneurs or founders. But I do think there's a lot of value in working sort of in the machine, because the machine teaches you how things have been done for a long time. So being in independent media or new media, it's really experimenting, and it's a lot of new, it's a new way of doing things, but you can't really test the new way of doing things without knowing how things were done previously. So I think for me, it was super valuable working in the corporate journalism world, the mainstream world, and I wouldn't have been able to know how to navigate without all those lessons.
So you gave a talk it was Fordham, right? Fordham?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
You gave a talk at Fordham, and I think a lot of kids who are in the process of graduating from any major, like marketing, journalism, even maybe finance, accounting, anything that could be touched by AI, which at this point is everything. What is the advice that you gave them for when they graduate?
So there's a couple things. I think one is enthusiasm can take you very far. So I don't think I was ever the smartest person in the room, especially not in school, because I had a lot of very smart friends growing up and in college. But I certainly tried really hard, and I was always very enthusiastic. So with my teachers and later in work with my bosses and my managers, I think enthusiasm can pretty much take you further than almost anything.
What does enthusiasm look like?
Raise your hand for everything. Always do it with a smile. I think those are 2 great North Stars. And then, it's very easy to go to work and you can be sort of lethargic and checked out and really not engaged with the work you're doing. And I think it takes so little effort to stand out, because so many people are not that engaged with the work they're doing. So if you express even 5% more interest or excitement or enthusiasm about the thing that's right in front of you, I think that's how you can stand out in a workplace or in a classroom. So enthusiasm is a great one. And then initiative is sort of part of that. And initiative, I mean, taking the time to go, 1 mile further, or creating a project on the side of your job or while you're a student. Because when you are graduating school, you will probably have the same resume, the same GPA as all the students that are applying to the same jobs as you. But the way to stand out would be to have a blog or have a podcast, or maybe you produced a TikTok channel that has however many followers. All these different things are signs of initiative. And I think those are easier ways to stand out than trying to have the highest GPA. So if you're a student applying to internships at Goldman Sachs, for example, everyone that's competing for those jobs will have very good grades, and they probably all have great, job experience and former financial internships.
Like sports and extracurriculars.
Yes. But then if you can differentiate yourself by saying, oh, I've also published 100 articles about finance on this blog, and even if no one reads the blog, that is a signal that you really care about the work that's in front of you, and that you're going to bring a lot of energy and enthusiasm to the table in this new place.
So speaking of Gen Zs, you said that you were told that you were a boomer in Gen Z's clothing after you stated that in-person work is important and it has helped shape your career. Do you think there could be a happy medium between hybrid, or is it all in person or nothing?
I think I think hybrid work or even remote work could be super beneficial, just depending on the individual. But I do think if you want to accelerate your career, you're probably going to get more bang for your buck showing up in person, especially if you're in a position where your future depends on a decision maker other than yourself. So like a manager, for example. And that's most people coming out of college. Like you get a job and then you're with a manager, and if there's a way to impress them, it's easier to do so in person, I think. I think it's when I was starting at Business Insider, we were sort of coming out of the pandemic. So there was a remote work flexibility, but I would go in every single day. And the only people that were in was pretty much myself and the leadership team in the company. And that, they didn't tell me to come in. And all the other, I would say like 90% of the people my age at the company were working remote. So suddenly I was the only young guy showing up to the office with all the leadership. So when opportunities came up, I was the only guy in the room to call on. And it's not like they couldn't call someone who was working remote or Slack them, but just because I was sitting right next to them in person, I had a bunch of opportunities come my way just by proximity. And if you combine proximity with raising your hand for everything and being enthusiastic and energetic about the work that's in front of you, there's no way you won't accelerate probably more than your peers that are working remote.
Do you think the perception of Gen Z being lazy or stupid or...
They're not stupid.
They also said also emotionally intelligent. I have heard that Gen Z is emotionally intelligent and also very cannot focus for long periods of time. What is something that you think people get right about Gen Z versus what people get wrong?
Gen Z is rightfully viewed as super tech savvy and I think very forward thinking and innovative. But I think people are also correct in saying that Gen Z can't focus on one thing at a time.
Me.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. It's very difficult. And I think a lot of that is just growing up in these critical development years of like your teens. If you grow up with a screen and a phone and you go through school with a screen and a phone.
Did you have a phone in high school or middle school?
It was a flip phone.
Okay.
So it was a couple years before.
Yeah. I grew up, I was not able to get a touchscreen phone until I was 16. So I think my brain had time to develop, but I can only imagine. See today's iPad kids and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Like, ugh, so cooked.
I think Gen Z is they have to change the world with technology, but I think there's a very big risk of relying on that technology as a crutch, because I think social skills have deteriorated generally. And a lot of that is from the pandemic too. And I think remote learning was a big part of that as well. But it's very hard to paint a broad brush on these things, because I know plenty of Gen Z individuals who I think are more focused and disciplined than any older folks I know. But then on the other side, I know plenty of Gen Z who they can't walk 5 feet without looking at their phone, or they can't, they can't go to sleep with their phone not next to them in the bed. So if you ever say like, oh, leave your phone outside the bedroom, you get a lot of pushback on that. And it sounds like a radical idea to
Is
a
that
lot
what
of,
you do?
I do that. Yes. And a lot of my very smart friends do that as well. But I think a lot of the basics like that will get a lot of pushback from Gen Z. But again, I try not to make too many broad generalizations, because there's always exceptions. And frankly, the exceptions are the ones that they will end up defining the generation, probably. The ones that are the most interesting or ambitious or successful. And those are great people to bet on too.
So how do you, what are tips that you have on, or what are things that you do that help you focus more? Because I feel like my issue is that I feel like I'll be doing something and my brain will be 5 different places at once. And it's not like sometimes there's anything that can stop that. It's just a product of what's happening, I guess.
Yeah. So something I do, I think probably the best thing or habit to focus is reading physical books.
Mm-hmm.
But to get to the point where you can read physical books, I think the best hack or practice would be to read a book without your phone in the room. Because if you have your phone next to you, your instinct is going to be checking your phone all the time.
Oh my gosh, I've totally done that.
Yeah,
I've totally
I
done
have
that.
too. I have too. But I know that I do my best reading when my phone is not within reach.
So how many hours out of the day are you actually not close to your phone at all?
Not many.
Okay.
Because it's my work.
Yeah.
So I need it for work. I need it when I go out. It's how I pay for things. It's how I work. It's how I call people.
You need it. Yeah.
So it is totally an essential, and it's very hard to get out of it. But if I take time to read in the mornings or evenings, I try my best to not have my phone within reach. So, if I'm reading on the couch, let's say, I'll put my phone in the other bedroom, things like that.
That's smart. I think I need to try that, because I now that I'm thinking about it, I'm like, I don't think I spend any time at all within more than 3 feet away from my phone. Seriously. At the gym, I have my phone because I'm listening to music. On the way to work, obviously I have it because I need to pay for stuff, so it's out. And then I'm also listening to music. At work, I also have it.
I think that's normal. Like, everyone, frankly, is like that these days.
Oh gosh, I don't even want to see the number of pickups that I would have. You know how you can see on... Ugh.
Screen time is pretty scary too.
Well, imagine that with your computer. You're probably on screens more than you're not on screens at all anymore.
These days, unfortunately, probably true.
I think that maybe potentially we're going to see the flip phones make a comeback.
I do have a friend who got a flip phone and he loved it. He did it for, it must have been a couple months at least, but he was going from, probably 6 to 8 hours a day screen time to suddenly 0. And he said his life got a lot better.
Really?
And I think everyone intellectually understands their life could improve dramatically if they use screens less. But it's become so ingrained in our day-to-day life, and it's such a habit.
Yeah, and it's also everything we do to make money or ingest information comes from these screens.
Big part of work, big part of staying connected to people. But it's very paradoxical, because the more you're connecting with people on the screens, the less you're present in front of the people around you in person. Like you and I right now, we're able to talk uninterrupted because we're not on our phones. But if one of us pulled out a phone, the whole rhythm of the conversation gets thrown off.
Yeah.
So that's all day, every day, though, in day-to-day life when you're not recording a podcast.
Yeah. And I noticed that and I think this has been like a slow thing that's happened over time. But when you talk to people, a lot of the times when you have conversations with people, even at the dinner table, at some point, everyone goes on their phones. It's like a habitual thing sometimes now.
You have to have a no phone rule at the dinner table.
No, I think so. And my parents are super... Actually, no, I lied. My parents used to have that rule that was super strict. And even they started abandoning it. And I was like, you guys are hypocrites. You know what I mean? Like, we have our phones out on the table.
It is hard.
Because to search something up, to dim the lights now, to put the lights back up. So yeah, interesting. Phones are good, I think, and a bad thing for so many reasons. But I mean, do you think we're going to reach ever the tipping point of technology to where, like, okay, we've actually become more anti-tech and more pro? Go touch grass, go be in nature. I think, in my opinion, we're maybe already experiencing that. But
you have a lot of people pushing for that now. I think people are saying, leave your phone in the other room, for example. Like we're literally talking about it right now.
Did you hear about the bill to ban phones from elementary schools?
I think I read something about this.
Pro or against?
I think it'd be very positive, I think, for kids.
I agree as well. Sorry.
I think if you, especially today, if you pair screens plus AI tools for kids,
so cooked.
It's very hard to learn and gain critical thinking skills because screens, everyone knows they're distracting us from the work at hand, right? Mm-hmm. And then if you add something like ChatGPT or Perplexity and suddenly you have the world's greatest invention for cheating and you pair those together, you can cheat easier than ever and screens are more pervasive than ever. How are students ever going to learn anything at that point?
But I was talking about a guest with this last week, and he didn't view it as a bad thing that critical thinking is automated. This means that people are going to have more time to spend on things that they actually love versus like solving for the Pythagorean theorem or anything like that. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think critical thinking can also be like how to communicate with people, how to have a conversation, how to build a relationship, how to read a book. So these are very fundamental, simple things. And if we lose our ability to grasp the most important ideas in the world, what does that do to, our own ability to like be a human and like navigate the complexities of the world? Because it's like, this is like our high school teachers would always say, you won't always have a calculator in your pocket. So you have to do things long form.
Yeah. And
we do have a calculator in our pockets all the time. Mm-hmm. But I think this is a more extreme version of that. So, I even catch myself now, instead of trying to answer a question, I just pull out ChatGPT and ask that what the answer is. And that's probably, if you do that over 10 years, what happens to your ability to answer your own questions? I don't know. Yeah. No one knows, really.
And also, I was thinking about this the other day. I think it's also... like there is kind of a reward that you feel when you've accomplished something that's challenging. And if you have the answer to absolutely everything, then you'll deem a lot less things challenging. So I wonder that effect that it's also going to have on people.
I think generally there's the idea that you're responsible for your own knowledge and your own personal development, things like that. And if you agree that your life becomes more meaningful the more responsibility you adopt, if you suddenly stop taking responsibility for your own knowledge, your life will probably get less meaningful.
Yeah, you feel depressed.
Maybe.
Okay, so moving on to the Trump versus the Biden era reporting. You've reported on both, correct? Mm-hmm. What have been the changes that you've seen in the media landscape in the Biden administration versus the Trump administration?
I think a lot of media businesses struggled during the Biden administration because there was certainly less news to cover. And
is it that there was less news, or was there just less
interesting news?
Oh, yeah, okay.
So the news was more boring, which some would argue that's a good thing. We don't need news to be reality TV.
Tariffs?
Maybe, who knows? But also, I don't think. For one, I think businesses and media did struggle as far as getting eyeballs, and the whole media game is attention and trying to say something smart about what's happening in the world. But if not that much is happening, or if the media is slanted to one way and they don't want to say anything about what's happening, then there's not going to be that many eyeballs. But now, just as in the first administration for Trump, it's a very, very 24/7 news cycle. So even I write a newsletter every day, right? My writing schedule has been pushed back very late into the evenings because it publishes before 6 a.m. every day. So I can't really write until very late at night, or if I wake up early in the morning to write, then I'll do that. But there's very few days now that I can finish work at 5 p.m. because there's so much news that happens after hours that I have to be on top of it and ready to make my newsletter the most timely thing in your inbox in the morning. But before Trump took office this time, there were so many days I could finish work at 4 p.m., 5 p.m., finish the newsletter for tomorrow morning, which was like almost a whole 12 hours would go by, and you didn't have to worry about anything happening in markets or the economy. But now that's all thrown out the window because if Trump tweets, the market can swing.
Yeah.
So my job as a finance reporter is much more difficult now because there's more to keep up with. At the same time, it is much more interesting and dynamic, my job. Mm-hmm. And, you know, frankly, the last administration, I think a lot of what they were doing was quite muted in the media. So it wasn't covered in such a timely way. And there was always a lag. But right now, it's very 24/7, very immediate. I think part of that, too, the Trump administration is very savvy with how they use media. So they are much more, let's say, you could say their media use is much more progressive than the past administration. So they're on the podcasts, they're on Twitter, they're on all the social channels, pretty much posting live or to the minute updates of what they're doing inside the White House, which is very unusual. And on one hand, you can say, all right, they're treating it like reality TV. Maybe Trump is a former TV star, but at the same time, you could say, all right, this is the most transparency we've seen. Whether you agree with it or not, they are showing a lot of stuff that's happening in the Oval Office. They have press in there all the time. So that's kind of an interesting change as far as the media angle.
But how do you remain objective, and how do you fact check what's true and what's not when you have so much information being thrown out all the time?
Yeah, and I think that's one strategy that the Trump administration is leaning into. It's really a fire hose of information. And part of that is the speed and the volume. So it's very hard to keep up for journalists. And, you know, you have to, what I do is I lean on my sources a lot. So if I'm not sure about something, I'll make a phone call to someone who's been in the industry for 25 years, and they tell me what they think. And then I can sort of square that with my other sources or my research and reporting. So that never changes. I think just because there's more information that's being published every single day, the fundamentals should work in any era. So your sourcing, your research, your interviews, your phone calls, these are all things that I think can make your reporting pretty bulletproof. But also, you know, I'm human. I make mistakes. I don't get everything right. And I think as long as I'm at peace with that, it's okay. And as long as readers are at peace with that, it's okay. Because I think it's very dishonest for news organizations, especially, to pretend like they are the arbiters of truth and that they can't be wrong. And a lot of times you see articles, they will change things on the site, and then they won't always put an editor's note and say that, oh, we had mistakenly said it was this instead of this, and then we edited it. So that I think is becoming more pervasive as well. So, you know, I try to be as transparent as I can in my own reporting. And really when I think what readers appreciate about my newsletter is that they can respond to the email and I will reply right away, and it's just me on the other side. So it's not like some HR or some bot or a corporate filter. It's really readers can just email me directly and I will just respond to them as person to person. And that's not that common in big corporate news.
And how do you remain, especially in a time where everything is very polarized and everything is politicized, how do you remain far removed from being, from having to share your explicit opinions?
I'm not always averse to sharing my opinion, but I think in my reporting, I just do my best to go by the data. So whatever the data is saying. And I think in one way, as a finance reporter covering the economy and the stock market, there is so much data available for me to draw from that it actually, I think it insulates me from sort of the political color that is happening in the rest of the news cycle. Because what I can do, I can really just look at what the market's doing, and the market informs the take that I'm going to have on something, because the market will never lie. The market is going to do what the market does, and no one can really parse through why it's doing what it's doing. But it's certainly going to be like you can't trick readers into telling them something that the market isn't actually doing. So I don't know if that fully answers your question, but based on the nature of the topics I'm writing about, they don't always call for having a political opinion because I just write about the data.
Right. Okay. And to people who are trying to absorb this information, I feel like there are a million sources of truth. I feel like we're seeing kind of the downfall of the mainstream media, in part because this administration always talks about how horrible the mainstream media is. But I think also in another part, there's just been a complete lack of trust amongst people and the media. So you're seeing these independent researchers, journalists, content houses start up and be very successful. Megyn Kelly's like a primary example. Anthony's another example. Like they all have their own sources of information. In those situations where these people do present their opinions, how can you remain objective? How can someone in today's day and age remain objective?
To your first point about the fall of mainstream media, I don't think that's because Trump is calling out the mainstream media. They were losing trust well before Trump. Mm-hmm. And I think it's been happening for decades. And I think part of that is lack of transparency. It's a lot of condescending reporting, mm-hmm. and also a very pervasive view that journalists are always right and they are not open to dialogue. So that's one thing I would say.
Is it the journalists or the companies that
both.
Are okay?
Well, a company is individuals, right? Mm-hmm. So if you ask someone at a sort of ivory tower news organization, there's very little discussion about them possibly being wrong. And that's a very outdated, old-fashioned way of doing the news. So I think readers today have been fatigued of that because they have seen how wrong the media can be over the last 5 years.
Yeah.
And there's been no accountability for it. No one's losing jobs over being wrong in the media. If anything, they get a promotion.
That's actually a good point.
Right? So,
and there's no repercussions for how, like, if this misinformation spread mm-hmm. and affected someone's life and all that stuff.
Or if you are a mainstream media outlet and you go after someone and call them a conspiracy theorist, or you call an idea a conspiracy, but then it turns out it was right, you do not lose your job as a journalist. If anything, your company will get more notoriety and possibly more traffic to the website. You know, so the incentives are all misaligned, but then independent media, all they have is their word and the trust and credibility with their readers because they don't have a corporate machine to hide behind. And if you make a mistake, I'll talk about myself. If I make a mistake in my newsletter, which I have, and readers call me out on it, I will own up to it immediately and say, yeah, I was wrong. Thanks for telling me. Now we can get better and move on. But that has never happened in a big news organization that I know of, at least in a way that makes other headlines. So you'll never see, especially news organizations, write about the shortcomings of other news organizations because they're all on the same side as well.
But when it comes to being objective, like, for example, Alex Jones, he mm-hmm. was the one that said all the Sandy Hook parents were staging.
I think he's actors. A particular case, though. He's a pretty unique individual.
Yeah, so I think I'm asking he's probably very extreme. But in every case, like, how can I, as a person who's absorbing information in today's day and age, remain objective and not
Yeah.
like fall into the trap of being like, okay, we have to lean on this spectrum. We have to align with this spectrum. Because I certainly feel guilty of doing stuff like that sometimes. So
I'm not sure as a consumer if your goal should be to be objective, because it's really hard to, you're human. You're going to have views and opinions on things, right? And if it's not your job as a journalist to be reporting on things objectively, I'm not sure if you're incentivized to be objective other than as a moral high ground, which if you want to do that, if anyone wants to do that, I think that's fine too, whatever, but you call it like it is. If you're hanging with your friends, hopefully you're honest about your views on things, and, no one's going to try to be objective in private, right?
but I think being objective can lead to like you can be maybe I'm mixing up objective with like being respectful of other people's opinions.
Well,
Because
that
I
should be a given at all times, right?
No, I know, but you have I feel like if you are objective, you're actually able to look at the facts and absorb the information without the overarching opinions of it. Like, and I feel like in today's day and age, we have a really hard time having conversations with people of a different political spectrum. Not me personally, and I know not you, but there are a lot of people that have this like really big divide amongst each other. So I think the reason why I was asking is that because in my thought process, it's like if we become more objective and look at the facts for what they are versus how we want to warp it or spin it into turning into something for political gain, then I think we could have better conversations with one another.
I agree. And I think that's true. I think as far as finding objective sources,
do you have any objective sources besides yourself?
I would say things that have been around longest are probably more true than not. So something I like, a kind of a shortcut, is like, if things were published yesterday, they're probably less true than something published 50 years ago, right? Because the thing published yesterday
totally
hasn't stood the test of time. We don't know if it'll be around enough or respected enough to last decades. So I think a really good way to bulletproof your views on the world and your education is just to read old books. So like, if you read all the oldest books, the things that have been time tested, been around for 50 to 100 years, you're probably in a pretty good information funnel, let's say. And then if all your information comes from the news, which refreshes every hour, it's very hard to pinpoint if the information you're consuming is real or if it's going to last or if it has any legacy behind it. Like we won't know. Even my newsletter, I write it every single day. I don't know if any of this will be around in 50 years. It's impossible to know. But then if I were to write a book, for example, that will probably have a lot more staying power than a newsletter. So that's like that's why I try to read, as many books as I can, in addition to all the news I have to keep up with for my job. But the books, I think, are my filter for the world, let's say. And then the news is like sprinkled on top as like just the things to talk about of the day. But it's not the worldview that I'm carrying around. And I think if your worldview is shaped by the headlines in the news, you should reevaluate, because you don't know if it has any staying power.
That's a very good point. What's your favorite old book?
One of my favorite books, which is a fiction novel, actually, but informed my worldview a lot because I've read it so many times. It's called The Razor's Edge by Somerset Maugham. This might be a 75-year-old book. And it's so good because a lot of what we're talking about right now, the book has a lot of these themes about, pursuit of knowledge, and sort of reverence for books is a big part of this book. And I remember there's one scene one chapter, the main character, all he wants to do is study very old books, frankly. He wants to study religion and philosophy and sort of theology, all these different old topics from old writers. And he does it because he says he's in the pursuit of wisdom. And then another character asks him, what are you going to do with it when you find it, wisdom? And he says, I guess I'll know when I have it. So it's not really, it's like a fundamental life philosophy, sort of. You're reading because reading is what sustains you. in a way. And I always appreciated that scene and that book and that worldview, because there's few things more rewarding, I think, than learning really good stuff. And the really good stuff is all old, I think.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming. Before we go, I'd love for you to tell everyone how they can support Opening Bell.
Yeah, my newsletter goes out every morning. It's called Opening Bell Daily, and it's free. You can find it online, find my name or the company name. And if you want, I think, I'd like to say the best financial news in the business.
True.
You sign
Can
up.
confirm.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.